Okay. All right. So I am here with Meghan Miller and Hallie Linnebur. Linnebur, correct?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
And we are going to talk today about their installation CristalStar in the Salina Biennial. But when before we get started, if you both wanted to maybe take a minute to just introduce yourselves individually and talk just a little bit maybe about your individual practice, and then we'll kind of move into the larger piece, if that makes sense.
Okay. You want me to go first? Okay. So my name is Hallie Linnebur, and as an individual artist, I do all sorts of things. I'm sometimes a muralist, usually like in the summer months, I'll do a mural or two around town. I'm also really into making costumes and performing, like various kinds of performance art, but right now I'm really into doing drag, like performance art in a drag sort of situation. And I kind of just dabble in all sorts of things, kind of one foot in like the realm of arts and crafts and one more like fine art, I guess, but don't really have any preferred media that I like to use. I'm just sort of all over the place. So, yeah.
Thanks, Hallie.
Mm-hmm.
Meghan?
So in my individual practice, I do use primarily paper. It is my favorite material, and I do 3D work with paper, like often with tissue paper or butcher paper. I like to use cheap and commonplace materials to create kind of, magical forms, and usually inspired by nature. So, and oftentimes, a little bit larger than life, nature, plant inspired forms. And that's kind of what I've been focusing on recently. And I've also recently added puppets to that practice.
All right, thank you. That's great, because I feel like a lot of your individual, I can see parts of each of those kind of individual ideas coming together within this one piece. So in your statement, you talk about how you've been working collaboratively since 2014 under the name Linnebur and Miller. Can you talk a little bit more about how that collaboration started and how you both work together as a team?
You want me to talk first about it? So we met in school. We were both students getting our bachelor's at WSU kind of at the same time, and I think we just had really similar interests in terms of materials we like, aesthetics, and, work styles and all that. And so I think, well, I don't know. I can't remember like how we first came to collaborate on something.
Was the Frida project was our first collaboration, and that was like one of the final projects of our senior year of our undergraduate studies. We set up an interactive kind of photo opportunity where we posed friends and family and community members in front of backdrops inspired, or well, actually like replicating Frida Kahlo paintings. It was after a trip to Mexico and seeing her work in person that we decided to do that.
Yeah, and then also like, for me at least, after I had been out of school for a couple of years, I wasn't really doing anything artistically, or it was just kind of feeling sort of stumped and bored with my own work and wanting to do something totally different. So I had at that point never done any like big art installations or anything that was sort of immersive, or definitely no like performance art or anything. And a lot of what Megan and I do does have a performance element to it. Not always, like sometimes like this work, for example, is just all about the installation and the sculpture, but like, for example, when we had this work installed in Brooklyn originally, like there was a performance element to it too. But like I said, not always, but for us, that was sort of like a way to branch out and do something new that we hadn't necessarily tried on our own. And we kind of fed off of each other.
Do you guys have, like, what kind of conversations do you guys have about content or materials? Like, how do you kind of figure out how things are going to come together?
I think sometimes, you know, we've started with just a material that we love. Like a few years ago, it was iridescent cellophane. It was kind of like a shared, you know, love of that beautiful material. And we used it for an interactive installation. And, you know, so like, sometimes it starts with the material, I think. Or it might just start with something that one or the other of us is interested in. Like this piece actually, I think, started partly with the idea of an inflatable plastic costume that Hallie was interested in making. You know, and then of course we have a shared love of thrifting as well. So thrift store materials provide a lot of inspiration, I think, for us. In terms of content, I was thinking about this the other day, especially maybe earlier in our collaborations, a lot of our ideas were based around like fake businesses or fake organizations, like you know, a library, but it was a magical transdimensional library where we told fortunes through, you know, like we would select a book that was significant to, you know, the visitor with our psychic abilities or whatever. So they were always these kind of pretend businesses, but with like an absurd twist to them.
That sounds like a lot of fun to me. I love, like, one of the things that I feel like comes out of this, your work together, is this idea, and it's something that I kind of underlined when I was reading, this sense of humor, this idea of fun, and just kind of pushing that to the limits and just having a great time with it. So now we can talk. I've put CristalStar up on my screen. We can talk a little more about this particular piece, which is a, large scale kind of installation piece with the lights. And when, you know, hopefully people will be able to see it in person in the next few weeks, but when you do see it, these lights are flickering and blinking different colors, and it creates this really great pattern of shadows on the wall, and there's a lot of movement and stuff. I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit more about this, you know, what was the basis of this piece in particular?
I think I think like what you mentioned about like the use of colored lights and stuff, that's another like common thread throughout our work. We love colored lights. We use them in a lot of our projects, and just in general, I think our color sensibilities and our, you know, the value we place on like our color schemes in our projects is you know, always a big part of it. And also, like, this is a great example of like our love of thrift store items and stuff. All, like, everything that makes up CristalStar is 100% like gathered from thrift stores or secondhand. They're reused, you know, objects. So taking those sorts of elements and trying to transform them into something that sort of evokes a, you know, a feeling of magic or fantasy or something like that.
And I think again too, with like a sort of a commonplace item or like an inexpensive item, like even when these were sold brand new, they're usually considered disposable or semi-disposable, and yet people save them and they end up in thrift stores. And it also represents celebration. I think that's another theme that we use a lot at parties, celebration, festival.
And that's one of the things that I definitely picked up on, because when you look at all these plastic pieces, it's like serving trays and stuff like that. So when you kind of, I think, combine it with this, like these blinking lights, I just get this feeling of like, oh, there's a party and it's gonna happen, you know, like something just really fun. Um, so this piece in particular is in one of our galleries with a lot of other pieces that are talking about not necessarily environmental issues, but some of them touch on environmental issues, but these ideas of the man-made world and kind of how it's encroaching on to the natural world, and some different ideas within there. And I mean, obviously you used plastic as the main medium here, but was that kind of, were you thinking about like this whole conversation around plastics when you were putting this together?
I think like it wasn't like a primary focus like to make a commentary on that when we were designing it, but it definitely was on the forefront of our minds, like, well, just planning on like, what are we going to do with it afterwards, and you know, like, are we contributing to a problem by using these sorts of materials? And I mean, for that reason, like for me it was important, well, for both of us probably, like that we use stuff that was already kind of discarded or had been used. I would feel totally different about this project if we had gone to Party City and bought a bunch of these kinds of things for this sort of project. Yeah, I can see like that there's that thread is there, or you know, there's some, I don't know.
And I think that's how we've worked oftentimes. Like we'll have an idea based on something we're interested in, based on something fun, you know, and we go into the idea and we do our best with it, try to make it as thorough and complete as possible. And when you do that, like, I feel like more layers come out.
Right, right.
In the content of the work.
So I think especially like Megan, you were just commenting on how like this idea of these pieces are thought of as disposable, but yet people keep them, and now here they are, like turned into this wonderful like installation. So you guys also talk about in your statement these ideas of you know, ephemerality, like things not necessarily being made to last forever. Can you talk a little bit more about how that works into your, you can talk about it like in relation to this piece or just in general, when how you use that in your work.
You want to?
I'm always, whether in our collaborative work or in my individual work, always drawn to ephemeral materials like paper. You know, it's just, it has a shelf life, I think. And I still don't necessarily know why I think that's important. Although with performance art and with kind of installations and experiences, I think there is an understanding that those are temporal, that, you know, they won't last forever. An experience won't last forever. At some point, maybe there's a beginning and an end, or, you know, the performance won't last forever. And so I think it makes sense that kind of we're interested in ephemeral materials. I don't know necessarily if I have like more ideas about that, but
I think also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think for both of us, like we just tend to want to work big, and like the experience that we give to our viewers is really like always first and foremost. And like for this piece, for example, like we never built it with the intention of like keeping it and storing. It's a real pain to put up and take down, and I wouldn't ever expect anyone really to want to buy this as an item. You know, I'm personally like I'm just not all that interested in making objects to sell, like in a, you know, in an art sort of capacity. I really just value giving people an experience more than anything else. So that's sort of like half a practical thing, like what do you do with this stuff after it's done, and half just like I I don't care what happens to it to some extent after it's been seen or whatever. So
I mean, I think it's great. I love that idea. It is so much about that experience, because I think contemporary art really is like about experiences, and it's getting to be more and more about having those kinds of experiences and not necessarily creating this object that's meant to last for however many hundreds of years. Yeah, like we could talk a little bit more about humor, because that's something that I definitely see, you know, in this piece, and that's something that I'm really drawn to in art, because I love it when artists create things that make people laugh, because I think that's, you know, an important part of this larger experience. And there's, like I said, there's just something about this piece when you go into the room, it has this, you kind of want to laugh, because it just, I don't know, has this feeling of like just joy to it. I don't know. Does that make sense? I don't know. You guys want to talk a little bit more about how you use humor in your work?
I don't even think it's something that we intentionally do. I mean, we definitely don't take ourselves too seriously, like with any of the work that we make. I don't think we ever set out to do something that's funny, but I also recognize that we're both just like kind of quirky, eccentric people with like kind of weird interests. So it comes out, and I'm definitely 100% okay with people like getting a kick out of the stuff that we do. But for me, it's not something I ever really think about.
I think it's definitely like a plus if people think it's funny. Like, we're open to it being weird and strange, and I mean, hopefully, you know, something unusual or different for people to see or do. And if it works out that it's funny, it's like, that's, you know, just icing on the cake, I think.
Yeah.
I don't want it to sound like, you know, I'm not trying to like insult the people.
Oh no.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, we've definitely done things that were, maybe not most of our work, but like some work was more purposefully comedic, like the fried egg thing.
Oh yeah, that's true.
We dressed as fried eggs and served fried eggs to an audience at a comedy show. You know, we weren't part of the show. We were like in the lobby or whatever. So kind of just thinking of those ideas that whether they're laugh out loud funny, I don't know. But like for me, I love if something I make can make someone laugh. I think that's almost like the best goal of art, and one of the hardest things to do. So like if we've done it times, like that's amazing.
Yeah, I think it is hard to get people to do that, but like I agree, like when I am in a gallery and I hear someone laughing at something, I'm always like, oh, that's great, you know, because it's someone really connected with something, if it's going to make them laugh, I think.
Yeah, it's a real emotional connection, you know. Right. And I think sometimes people in some situations are afraid to laugh, or like they don't know if it's okay.
Right. Exactly.
And it's definitely okay with us.
Awesome. Yeah, like I said, I think it's you know, I'm excited for people to be able to kind of come in and experience, because it is really this, you've created this atmosphere, and I think it's just wonderful to be in it. So yeah, hopefully, you know, we can do that soon. I have two more questions that I've been asking all of the artists. I don't have any other questions that are really necessarily related to this piece. Did you guys have any other comments or anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about related to CristalStar?
No, not that I can think of.
So with these interviews, I've been asking the artists the same two questions to kind of close it out. And one of them, the first one is, what does it, this is the Salina Biennial, work from the Mountain Plains region, contemporary art specifically from the Mountain Plains region. So I wanted to get some input from the artists. What does it mean when you say you're a contemporary artist working in the Mountain Plains region? Can you tell me a little bit, if that has any meaning to you as an artist?
For me, it didn't for a long time. Like I didn't really feel particularly connected to this place, even though this is where I've lived my whole adult life. Like I always thought like at some point I would move away and to, the coasts to make it as a real artist. And that, like, now I'm so happy to be here, and I feel so lucky, like, to have the art scene that we do, where it's really pretty open to anything. Like we've done some pretty wacky off the wall kind of stuff, and we're usually embraced in such a affirming sort of way, that I think like the coasts are, my impression is like it's a lot harder to make it as an artist, and I'm a sensitive person, like I don't know that I could handle it, but here it's like I'm constantly, I feel like lifted up as an artist, and I think we all do that together as a community, and I'm grateful for that.
That's great.
I agree totally. Yeah. Our experience of working in the Plains region has been, I think, been really good, and the opportunities that we find here are unique. I think you hear on the one hand maybe there aren't as many opportunities for artists, but on the other hand I think there's like a lot of room to experiment and try new things here, and just I think there's literal physical space, and there's also just like mental space for that here in our region that might be it's easier to find here than it is perhaps on the coasts.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I feel like that's kind of been a running theme with a lot of the artists, and I agree that, I mean, it's exciting for me to see artists like doing these things that are so creative, kind of out there. I think one of you had said, kind of absurd, and I love it. I think it just, that you're able to kind of explore those things within the community here is, I think, really exciting. So the last question I've been asking everybody is just, we are slowly coming out of our stay-at-home order, but we've all kind of been just, everything's kind of stopped right now. And as artists, are there things that you're exploring or things that you're doing within the situation that we're in right now that are maybe different than what you normally would do?
Yes, for me, this is why I started making puppets. Something I've been interested in for a long time, and that Hallie and I have done a little bit too, but really like committing more time to it just seemed like a great way to kind of express how I feel about things right now. And it's something I can easily do at home, and it's something that fits in a Zoom window pretty easily.
Sorry. I don't think that like my art process has really changed all that much. Like I do a lot of my work at home anyway, and I've been trying to stay busy and just do stuff on my own. But like a lot of events that Megan and I or just myself as an artist like do to kind of sustain ourselves, especially over the summer months, like Riverfest is always a big one, and other things like that have been canceled, and so that has been a little bit of a blow. Like we've talked about, most of our work is ephemeral, and so we need an audience, like we need a crowd to really do the kind of work we typically do, and obviously that hasn't been an option for us, so that's been a little bit weird. But
yeah, I know there's been artists too that have been talking about, you know, just the financial issues kind of all like wrapped up in this, you know, because people are losing work, they're losing opportunities to have that audience and stuff like that. I don't know if Kansas is doing a lot. I know some other states are trying to find grants or other ways to be able to support artists at this time too. But yeah, I know that's a good reminder, I think, for the audience in general that we should still be supporting the artists that we care about right now.